If you march on bass drum, it's often difficult to find ways that you can practice and simulate what it's like to actually perform with several other people. I've got over 250 exercises that are specifically designed for helping you to be able to improve. The splits timing exercises, there are many different patterns in here that can help you out with practicing without somebody else there. The first 2 lines of each one of these timing exercises makes it so you can hear both parts. So you might play the top part or the bottom part. So when you get to the 3rd line here, it's actually going to mute drum 2. But when you get to the last 2 lines, it's going to mute drum 1. Now there's even more marching bass exercises that can help you out. Like for example, if you have a bass line with 5 people and you click on this bass permutations, there are over 30 videos that are many different variations, permutations of some splits that you can work on. So you can also practice just your basics like triplet timing, 8th note timing, 16th note timing, over 80 timing exercises on here that are different subdivisions and whatnot. But then there's also the timing transitions. So this is going from one or more rhythms into other rhythms. You might want to be able to work on your 5-lets into 9-lets. Well, you can work on that by going into these timing transitions, and it will have all sorts of different variations that you can do to practice that. These are currently members first, which means that they're scheduled to release to work on that. Even though it is difficult to practice marching bass drum on your own, you can practice this by using these exercises on here. And then there's literally thousands more that you can do. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description, or by going into my home tab of YouTube. 4 different types of strokes. A stroke that starts up and ends up, so it's up, up. A stroke that starts up and ends down, that's up, down. A stroke that starts down and ends down, that's down, down. And then a stroke that starts down and ends up, so it's a down, up. 2 accents, 2 taps. You go all 4 different stroke types in just 4 notes. You start off with 12-inch accents on this accent relaxer, and then you're gonna play 12-inch and 11-inch taps. So it's like an emphasis. You'll hear it. It's felt, not necessarily like seen. But then 12 and 9, and then 12 and 6, and then 12 and 3. But then the second half of the exercise, it just goes back up. And while you're doing this, you're trying to focus on relaxing the accents so you're not like squeezing for those 2 notes. So when you're playing exercises like this alternating upstroke grid variation, we're playing it slow. Right now, we're about to play through it at 44. When I'm doing this, I am playing with a light accent where I'm just pulling the stick back, and I'm not overemphasizing each one of these just because it's slow and I'm like trying to put extra strength behind it. The reason why is because I want to be able to just let the velocity of the stroke as we speed it up do the work for me. So without squeezing and adding extra tension to my hand, which will ultimately slow me down, I want to just let the height and the velocity of the stick create the volume that I want to get when I'm playing through this faster. It's going to naturally get that extra volume in there. So when you're practicing these exercises, these play along slowly, which I highly recommend doing, make sure you use a light accent when you are going slow. It will pay off. What is the exercise you practice most to increase chops? There's not a single exercise that I can recommend to improve chops. What I recommend to improve your chops is actually to work on your technique. If you refine your technique, like using any of these exercises, that will improve your playing. If you want to improve your speed and your endurance, you could do the technique exercises or these chop exercises, or even the grid variations. Play them 5-10% faster than you can comfortably, but do that for a small portion of your time. No more than 10% of your time. Even though it won't sound great and the technique won't be there and the sound quality won't be there, it's training hands to play faster, training brain to think faster, so that way I can get just a little bit better. So the biggest factor for myself with like improving my speed was not like working on chop exercises, but working on them slowly and refining the technique with like absurd level of obsession in terms of like trying to refine the motion and the mechanics to make it so that I could play faster and more relaxed. It's not just about like speeding up the hand, because then people will try and like, oh, I'm gonna muscle it in and get faster. Like that's not gonna end up working for you in the long run. Only do that like 5 or 10% of the time. Do I think practicing dribbling a basketball could transfer over to drum skills? Nope. The movements are not similar enough. The conceptual understanding of the motion of the stick as it relates to like the rebound of a basketball conceptually is what makes sense. So what you're doing is you're understanding the concept of, if I throw a ball into the court, it will bounce back up, as opposed to taking the ball, throwing it down on the ground, holding it down, and then picking up the ball, and then throwing it back down again, picking it back up, like, and that wasted motion. So conceptually, that is all you're supposed to get out of that. But in terms of like physically practicing moving the ball, no, because you're using two different of muscles at a two different amount of speed. So for example, even if you were to use the motion of your drumming at the exact same motion of like a basketball, like if I do it exactly like this in this exact same way, everything about it 1-to-1, it's too slow. It's not like I'm gonna dribble the basketball like that. Like I'm not gonna, it's just not gonna happen. So whenever you're thinking of teaching something to a student, it's fine to use like metaphors, analogies, things like that. Like with the basketball thing, like conceptually that makes sense, but you need to also think about like what physically is going to transfer over as well. So like, is the motion similar enough that you're going to have similar muscle groupings, similar neural firings that will transfer over from one skill to another? That's easier said than done though. Wire flam exercise called shopping sprees. The Blue Devils Book of Drumming with Scott Johnson. Inside of it, in the like notes, they talk about the origin of shopping spree. So shopping spree came from the idea of you are shopping for harder notes. Typically speaking, would have check, drag, check, cheese, check, 5, and then anything after that was just kind of like up to you. But then they started doing some weird stuff like the one that we have right here, which has check, drag, check, cheese, check, 5, but it's like in this 3, 4, 5 pattern, and it's all like goofy and whatnot. Usually members of the drumline would kind of come up with their shopping spree and they just kind of figure it out on the bus, but that's where it came from. When Vanguard started playing Cheesy Poofs by Murray Gussick, they do it as check cheese, check drag, check 5, and people will complain about it. Like, you're not doing it in the right order. And Murray's like, why does it need to be in one way and not the other? Do you have any advice for cadence exercise writing? Yes, I do. Just keep writing more. So like the first time I started writing, I go back and look at that stuff. I'm like, woo, that was bad. And like now I look at the current stuff I'm writing, I'm like, this is significantly better. Just keep working on it. To be less generic than that though, with response, be more specific. Look at what other people are doing and write variations on that. Or listen to music and draw inspiration from it. If you sort by oldest, this very first one called Last Call is an arrangement, a cadence that I wrote based off of Outkast's song by the same name. Flaxening, it's like a lot jam. It can also be played as a cadence. That one is an arrangement of Outkast's song called The Rooster. Same thing for you. Whatever music you enjoy listening to, you can listen to that and you can try and like write your own arrangement of that. Or you can listen to other cadences and go, what would I do that's kind of like this, inspired by it, but is different? One of the things that you're trying to do when you're listening in is trying to make it so that your playing disappears into the player who's on the inside of you, whether it's your interpretation, your velocity, heights, your balance, all sorts of things that you got to listen for. It's not just like playing rhythmically in time. The great lines like focus on like, well, what's your touch? How fast is your stick moving into the head versus the other person's? Not just like, what's the height at, but what is the actual speed, the velocity